Next up is Do No Harm, Protecting Our Children. And here to lead our panel this morning is Dan Bartkowiak, who is a graduate of Grove City College and for over 15 years has now been with the Pennsylvania Family Institute, a leading pro-life, pro-family nonprofit organization based in Harrisburg. He currently serves as their Director of Communications. He is a spokesperson for the organization on numerous issues, including the Pennsylvania March for Life and the marijuana legalization concerns. Would you please welcome Dan Bartkowiak.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
All right. Good morning. I will, if I may, I do appreciate seeing Dr. Kengor here. I was a student of his many years ago, and just appreciate, I would not be sitting here if I didn't attend Grove City College. The amount of just avenues and doors open for me at that college, and really what they're doing, that's what higher education should be. And so I appreciate Dr. Kengor, their team, Institute for Faith and Freedom. I know they have a table here, so I encourage you to attend and connect with them. I'm excited for this panel. Really, it's a topic that needs to be talked about more. And we've talked a lot about President Trump, many of the executive orders that he has signed, and one in particular on January 28th, he signed an executive order entitled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. And specifically, I'll quote, it said, "It is the policy of the United States that it will not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another, and it will rigorously enforce all laws that prohibit or limit these destructive and life-altering procedures." This is something we have an excellent panel. Yes. Going on down, Brianna Howard is with Independent Women's Forum, really leading the charge when it comes to really telling stories. Some of it is dealing with girls' sports, but particularly even this issue as well, those that have detransitioned and the need to tell their stories. We have Dr. Micelli, he's the medical director for Do No Harm organization, really leading the charge when it comes to this issue, and just appreciate his insights when it comes to the evidence that really is lacking when it comes to what is happening to many of these children. And then Senator Judy Ward, in her second term as senator, yes, does many an issue when it comes to defending children. I know she's a registered nurse as well, so brings some expertise here. So I'd like to start, Dr. Micelli, if you would, really helping us understand where is the science and medical evidence when it comes to a child experiencing gender dysphoria and where we stand on this issue.
Well, thank you for having me and having us and having this panel. I think it's just such an important topic for us to discuss, especially when it's about our kids. You know, as a psychiatrist, and I'd certainly ask you not to hold that against me, but as a psychiatrist and as a physician, it's just so important to really approach your patients with compassion and understanding. And, you know, patients come to us in their most challenging times. And gender dysphoria and those symptoms of discomfort and confusion that a child might experience are some of the most difficult periods that a child may have in their life. And I think it's so important for us to really make sure that we are hearing where folks are and understanding the concerns they have and listening to their parents and their family and really taking into account the whole extent of what might be going on. And I think for that, it really relies upon us to understand the evidence as clinicians as to what we can provide in terms of good quality medicine to folks who are coming to us in a time of need. And for that, we don't really need to look too far. I mean, we can look to the systematic reviews that have been done. The United Kingdom, the CAS review is out there. It was released last year. And it really points to the fact that there's weak evidence. There's really no evidence to support the sex trait modifications that we are doing to kids. And, you know, that includes puberty blockers, hormones, surgeries in adolescence. And these are just, you know, life-changing procedures that unfortunately have many of these kids become medical patients for life. And it really ignores so much of what the true symptoms are when they come and they present. So I think there's much data out there, and other countries like the United Kingdom or Sweden and Finland have really responded when they look at the systematic reviews, when they look at the compilation of the evidence, and they said, well, you know what, this is not right for kids. We don't want puberty blockers in the adolescents or hormones and such, and they've made those decisions. we in the United States have not, right? We are struggling with this, and we're struggling with our medical community. The body of organized medicine, unfortunately, has swallowed the World Professional Association of Transgendered Health's WPATH, their statement or their standards of care, 8th rendition, which really aren't much in the way of standards at all. There's no need for a psychiatric evaluation. There are no guardrails really in place to secure that we are appropriately treating folks, and it really makes folks go on to this quote-unquote affirming pathway, which unfortunately leads to puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries. So I think in the United States here, we really have an obligation to look at the data that's from overseas, and frankly, even look at some of the data that is in this country. We have physicians, Dr. Olson Kennedy out in California, who the New York Times, no friend of the conservative movement, found that she was not reporting data from a trial, an NIH-funded trial, so our taxpayer dollars funding a trial, and the concern was because the data really didn't show that puberty blockers were helping these kids. And that's, I think, stuff that we as taxpayers, as citizens, as physicians, we really need to demand. So it's so critical for us to understand the evidence. And the last point that I'll make is much of this is based on what is called the Dutch protocol in terms of giving kids hormones and puberty blockers and surgeries and such. And that protocol was really based on 100 or so kids, and they were very different from the kids that we are seeing today. And I think that's a really critical point to understand, because those kids didn't have comorbid psychiatric illness who were in that cohort. Those kids actually had gender dysphoria at a very young age. But what we're seeing today is very much this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria. And so those are actually kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria in their adolescence. 2/3 of them have a psychiatric illness or a neurodevelopmental condition. And 50% of them have had a stress or a trauma that just came prior to their gender dysphoria. And so we're missing out on a lot of things when we attribute their struggle to the fact that they need, quote unquote, affirmation, and they need to be set on this pathway that just leads them to really a lot of terrible damage and unfortunately does them no service whatsoever. So I think it's important for us to understand that. Lisa Littman did a tremendous amount of work there, Abigail Schreier. There's a lot of literature out there that we can look at and understand, and we can realize that social media, unfortunately, it has a huge role in causing this contagion. And we know that girls, for instance, in certain social networks where there are other kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria, experience gender dysphoria at rates that are almost 70 times higher than elsewhere. So we see this phenomenon, and it is up to us, certainly in the medical community and as parents, to certainly love these kids and support them and really help them through and not set them on a pathway that causes harm.
And Doctor, you brought up taxpayers, and I think here in Pennsylvania we see what has happened in the last several years, where hundreds of surgeries for children with regards to removing healthy body parts. You have thousands of children being prescribed puberty blockers, and really millions of dollars in taxpayer funding that has gone to these types of services. So I know in knowing some of that evidence, Senator, in knowing some of the taxpayer dollars that have been used for this, really the lacking of evidence we see in countries like Europe that have stopped puberty blockers because of the lack of scientific evidence. What are you taking action on in seeing these problems here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I just believe that we have a duty to protect children. And, they're confused. Their parents are confused. And so kind of in line with what the president's doing, I have a bill that would not allow any kind of sexual transitioning procedure or drugs until someone is 18 years old. If you think about it, we don't allow our children to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, play with power tools. We keep them from harm. And I think it's so, your organization is so aptly named, Do No Harm, because these young people move forward to have such problems in adulthood, and it's really so sad and troubling. And it's confusion, and it's psychological issues, and we can't allow this. We just can't allow this. So I have a bill, and with the help of Do No Harm, we've had rallies at the Capitol making people aware of this, because it is something that is shocking when you know more about it. I mean, it is so shocking. And we have the #1 hospital, pediatric hospital in the country here in Pennsylvania doing these surgeries. And so, there's the other side of it. There's the business side of it too. And so we have to look at that and say, wait a minute, this just isn't right. So we've got a bill, and I'm grateful for the support, and grateful to you all for also supporting us in what we do in the Capitol. So thank you.
I know it was several months ago that the senator really highlighted this issue, and it was particular. I know your bill, the Do No Harm Act. I know Do No Harm released a database of children's hospitals from around the country, and you can see it. I think it's at stoptheharmdatabase.com, and you see how CHOP is really their worst offender. And I think especially the advocacy that they had done to influence many other hospitals is a reason why they're at the top. But there's several others, sadly, that have been involved in these types of irreversible surgeries on children. And you can see more at the database. I want to bring Brianna. I know your title, Ambassador and Influencer Manager, I believe. That's a great title. But I know you get involved really with the girls that have been harmed by this. There was a rally at the Supreme Court, the Skermetti case, that is looking to really defend states that are taking action, like what Senator Judy is doing here in Pennsylvania, looking to do, other states have done. Why is that so critical? And I think, could you tell us some of the stories of these girls that have been harmed by this type of procedure?
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on this panel. I think this is an extremely important topic, obviously. So at Independent Women's Forum, we're really leading the charge on the storytelling aspect of what's happening to these young women in particular, to their parents, to their families, and how, it's really the whole family that's being implicated in this radical gender ideology that these young people are subscribing to, and then, they're forcing their parents to buy into it as well. And I think parents have been told a lie that if your kid is not allowed to transition, they'll commit suicide. And I think that's an extremely harmful narrative that's been manipulated by medical professionals who really have bought into this kind of gender ideology. And our work at Independent Women's Forum is to help raise awareness and show what is happening around the country to all of these young women in particular. I have the unique opportunity with my title, as you said, to travel the country with some of these young ladies and see them tell their stories, help them, empower them to be able to tell their stories, because many of these young ladies are very, very emotionally scarred. They have physical scars now because they've been part of this medicalization of radical gender ideology, but they have mental scars that go generations deep, and trauma that has never been addressed properly, and that has led them to take action in a different way to sort of cope with the trauma. Many of them are survivors of sexual assault, of home life trauma, of abuse in so many ways. They're all very open. Chloe Cole is a pretty infamous, famous detransitioner now who's spoken about her story, and she talks about her struggle with mental health. Prisha Mosley, who I'm worked very closely with, she's an ambassador of ours at Independent Women's Forum. She has a really unique story and has taken to telling it around the country just to help advocate and ensure this is not happening to any other child like her. She had a double mastectomy when she was 17 years old. Her life has been forever altered by radical gender ideology and gender-affirming care, which, it is not gender-affirming care. It is chopping healthy body parts off of young adults and young children that makes them into lifelong medical patients. I think that's a great point that you said, and it's kind of the CHOP, right? It's the acronym for the hospital, but it feels especially fitting to just call it CHOP when that's what they're doing, is chopping healthy body parts off of children and making them into medical patients for life. So,
Prisha, and I remember being at the U.S. Supreme Court. I was in attendance for this rally before the oral arguments at the court, and she was at the podium, and I was just right almost in front, and sharing her heart. And it was just so tragic, some of the things you were saying. At the same time, the side that would want to advocate and really be on the other side of this issue were screaming obscenities and everything against her. And it was just so discouraging to hear the vitriol that was being spewed at her. I guess, could you share more? Because I think it's just so critical to hear from these types of girls that have been subjected to these irreversible surgeries. Just, in terms of like an act like the Do No Harm Act, why would they support this? What did they go through as a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old? What medical professionals told them? What is the problems that you're hearing from them? Why would they support legislation like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are the biggest supporters of legislation like this because they know how wronged they were, right? They want to seek justice. They want to make sure that nothing like what happened to them happens to other children. And you see stories of these little girls and little boys who were put on hormone blockers at age 12, at age 13. And from there, it's a recommendation for top surgery, which is a double mastectomy. Like, I think they call it top surgery with this idea that it sounds a little bit less vulgar, but the things that have been happening to these young people, they're very, very horrific, and they're medically very shocking to hear about, right? But I think it's worth talking about, right? If they have some, and Prisha especially has been very open about the medical trauma that has happened to her since, transitioning and now detransitioning. She actually unexpectedly became pregnant, and the medical, as a woman who has had a double mastectomy, who is on testosterone for an extended amount of time, her body's reaction to being pregnant was mass confusion. And she's talked about this, and I think her story especially, because she is someone who, is an advocate, but this is also her life. So she's using her lived experience, the trauma of taking cross-sex hormones, which, anyone who's ever taken a medication that didn't sit right with their body, a cross-sex hormone is never gonna sit right in the opposite sex body. So for them to talk about their medical experiences, it's hard to hear. Honestly, I travel with these ladies a lot, and I oftentimes find myself in tears. I know them very well, but hearing how horrific it was for them to have surgery, have their healthy breasts removed, and then the scar tissue that has, bleeds and leaks and all of these like really medically graphic things. But I think because we're telling those stories, people are seeing how awful that is and why it matters, right? Like their stories matter so much because they don't want that to happen to other kids. So the legislation, they're the biggest supporters of. Prisha is, has a little baby at home, but she's still taking her time to testify around the country on different bills, supporting or against ones that are harmful, because she knows why it matters so innately because of what happened to her.
I know it's so really horrific seeing what's happened, but I do appreciate the many girls that are speaking out, and sadly there's too many. Dr. Micelli, I know you've talked about really the standards of care and really where that has gone really on this issue. I know you have a background at board certified in psychiatry and internal medicine. Just could you speak into really what you've seen, kind of maybe the lax of standards of care that is given to these girls on this issue?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is where you look for the standards, and WPATH and its standards of care, 8th edition, which I believe came out in 2022, really takes off a lot of the guardrails. And you really could see, if you look at the standard of care from their first edition, decades ago, to where we are now. It used to be that you would have a psychiatric evaluation, that you would see a psychiatrist, perhaps even 2 different evaluations. In fact, I remember as a resident physician doing psychiatric evaluations for folks who were going to get bariatric surgery, or for folks who are going to get a liver transplant. And those are obviously big surgeries, important decisions and such. But wow, for this decision, of course you would want a psychiatric evaluation. Of course you should want to treat the comorbid psychiatric illness before you subject someone to puberty blockers, hormones, surgeries. It only would seem to make sense. But the standard of care has now removed that. And so you only need to be sort of a qualified physician, and it really could be anybody who could say that, hey, you're ready, you can go to surgery. And I think that's a real problem, if these guardrails aren't there anymore. And then you even find practices that aren't even following the standards of care, which are even less of a standard. So, it almost becomes, it becomes really deeply troubling. And unfortunately, we have societies like the American Academy of Pediatrics that has issued its own set of guidelines in 2018, which very much echo the same sentiment. And again, these are the guidelines for the society, the quote-unquote mainstream pediatric society that each of our pediatricians is, perhaps maybe a member of and is getting these guidelines. That's a real problem, that there's been this sort of ideological indoctrination at the part of organized medicine. And we really need to have more debate in medicine so that folks can realize the harms that are being caused. And I think, frankly, a lot of folks don't necessarily realize these harms. That was the reason that Do No Harm put together the Stop the Harm database, because between 2019 and 2023, there were 5,700 of these surgeries that were carried out throughout our country. And if you even want to look at the Journal of American Medical Association, you'd find they had a recent paper in JAMA Pediatrics that showed that 14 out of 10,000 girls by the time they were 18 had received a prescription for a cross-sex hormone, testosterone or such. I think the incidence of diabetes type 2 in that population is about 10 in 10,000. So, I mean, this is a real problem, and we really have to address it. And we've got to address it with good quality care and therapy that actually aims to understand someone, that does a full biopsychosocial evaluation, that aims to really help someone through, as opposed to putting them on a pathway that is terribly destructive. And I think, psychiatry really needs to step up to the plate in that regard. And unfortunately, as a society, in the psychiatric world, we haven't, and it deeply troubles me. It's one of the reasons that Do No Harm. We're excited to be going to the American Psychiatric Association event in May, because we want to make sure that we have a voice there, that we are aiming to shine light on this issue, because it's important. We know that there are good people out there, and we know we need to grow those numbers, increase those trends to really help these kids and continue to do the right thing and really have medicine, again, do no harm. I mean, it's really simple.
And I think you're getting at the end, really, how can we show compassion to these, individuals that are, it's experiencing gender dysphoria, that path forward, really, that we're looking for. And I think if either of you want to comment, just again, how do we share compassion with these individuals? I know you're kind of guiding from a healthcare perspective. Just what is that process? What should we be doing, and what is lacking? Obviously, right now, I think you guys highlighting that. But what is a compassionate way forward?
I think so many of these young people, I mean, this is a hard world for young people right now. And I think so many of them, they turn to social media to find community. How many of these kids were forced to stay home during COVID and they couldn't go to school and have friends at school? So where do they go? They look for friends online. And so many of these people online, they're infiltrated with individuals who want to cause harm to young people. And so I think that's why they've gravitated to some of these communities. A lot of detransitioners I've met have all talked about the role of social media, of Tumblr, of TikTok in their transition. But I think the best way to show compassion is to let kids be kids, and to not, to be careful about what parents are letting their kids see on the internet. And I think that maybe isn't compassionate for some parents, but kids are kids. They're impressionable. If they see someone online that they want to be like, they're going to do what they think it takes to be like that person. So if they're seeing, a famous trans individual on TikTok, well, of course they're going to gravitate towards that. So I think the compassionate thing to do is to be hard on your kids, probably. I don't have children. I know that's not as easy as it is, but it's not compassionate to affirm a lie. It's not compassionate to affirm delusion. And I mean, that's what's happening. So I think the most compassionate thing parents and relatives of these individuals can do is to tell them that, no, you are not a boy, you are a girl, and we will let you play sports. If you want to have short hair, but you're not a boy, you're not going to take testosterone. That's the most compassionate thing I think that can be done for these kids.
And don't you think folks like the people who have transitioned, who have not had a good experience, it's so important to have them out there explaining, the medical problems they have, the psychological problems they have, and the fact that they really now can't have a normal life because of all their, and this was, a phase they went through. It was after trauma, it was, whatever. But, I think hearing these stories is very powerful.
Absolutely. I would definitely encourage anyone who's interested. We have a series called Identity Crisis at Independent Women's Forum that's sat down and done mini documentaries with a lot of these young ladies, the parents of these young ladies, because again, this is a lie that's being told to these parents by psychologists, by medical professionals. If you don't allow your child to transition, they are going to commit suicide. And I think that is such a troubling narrative that, again, is something that a lot of these detransitioners and desisters, right, folks who have sort of dabbled in it but haven't fully committed to a trans sort of identifying lifestyle. But I do think the compassionate angle, again, is just telling the stories, right, like showing the world what has happened to these young people. And really, we have a whole generation of kids who is going to come forward in 20 years, 10 years. We have no idea what the long-term effects of cross-sex hormones are on these young people. And I think again, it's making lifelong medical patients out of healthy kids. And so we have no idea what the implications of that are going to be in 10, 20, 15 years. So, yeah.
It's hugely important, and I appreciate you sharing compassion, because the compassion is key. I mean, that's something that we all need to have for each and every human being that's out there. And I like the one book that Dr. Miriam Grossman wrote was Lost in Transnation. And she talks about some of these stories of how you can have that conversation. If your child were to come to you and say that they thought they were a boy when they're a girl or such, and vice versa. And I think it's really helpful to be minded in that sense. And I also think it's important that parents, if they're seeking out therapeutic care, that they really understand where their therapist is coming from or where their psychiatrist is coming from. Not that you have released your child to someone that all of a sudden is going to promote the conversion. I mean, it's one of the important things that we really want to make sure that in schools, the act of social transitioning, of taking on new pronouns, is not an innocent act. It is one step that leads one into this pathway, and I think we have to recognize that. And yeah, there's no compassion in that affirmation, but that doesn't mean that we don't love our kid. In fact, the act of love is to do the right thing. So,
every child deserves the opportunity to grow up healthy and whole. Yes. And I share a story. My son, at 9 days old, needed heart surgery, and miraculous story. But what I look back on, my son's never going to tell me he regretted his heart surgery. It saved his life, and very grateful for it. We have so many of these girls that are regretting their decision, boys as well, but many that are regretting this life-altering decision that was made as a child. So lastly, if I could, the Do No Harm Act, what can people do? What is it that those that are concerned over this issue can do here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Reach out to your legislators, your state legislators, the House and Senate members. Let them know that that's an issue you care about. And I know for most of us, when we go to vote on something, we have a database of calls, letters, emails, and we go to that and we say, how do people feel about this in the district? And if you make your voice heard, that's the best way to help, and just be supportive and, talk amongst your friends why you feel the way you do. And that's what's so great about this whole conference, is that these are issues that we're all passionate about, and hearing speakers gives you more information and what you need to be passionate about these issues. So,
It's all through. Thank you so much for your influence on this issue. Can we give a round of applause to our panel here?